All right, it's 5 after, so I'll get started. Cool. Okay, my name is Jay Malone. I run a company called New Haircut. Our story is we were a product design and development studio, and around 2015, we started experimenting in the world of design thinking through the form of design sprints. And since then, we have backed away from being a design and development firm. And nowadays, I spend a lot of time facilitating strategy workshops, helping groups get through and plan for upcoming innovation programs, workshops, design sprints. So I do a lot of facilitation. I do some coaching as well with design and research leaders, innovation leaders. And then I also do a lot of trainings. And my latest venture that I've been working through is taking what I've learned about specific frameworks and bodies of knowledge and methods and putting them inside of toolkits. So after I answer some questions, or when there's a break in the questions, I'll do a quick walkthrough of a quick tour of the problem framing toolkit that I've created and just answer any questions that come up specifically about the toolkit and any of the resources in there. What else? If you just jumped in and you didn't hear me say this, I'm recording this event. Afterward, I'm gonna add it to our New Haircut's YouTube channel. And then I'll also drop a link to it in the Miro board, which I'll put it one more time in here. And I'm using this Miro board to capture questions that come up because it's a great learning process for me to see what questions and sort of thorny ports around problem framing that come up for you. And then I use that to share back with other folks that are interested, don't want to come to an event, or just want to check in to see what questions other folks are asking. And then at the end, in the last few minutes, if you're still here, I have a couple questions for you guys. So we'll see if you're willing to help out with that. Cool. So what I'm going to do is this is an AMA. So what I don't do a lot of presentation really, except to walk through the toolkit. I just basically go through questions and respond to them, or invite other people to respond to them as well, because I'm sure there's a lot of knowledge in the room. So with that, if that all sounds good to you guys, I'm going to jump into starting to answer some questions. So just as a quick tour of this board, if you see Post-its in here, and again, the link to what I'm talking about is in the chat of the Zoom call. So if you see Post-its in here that have little pink Post-its next to them, those are questions that I answered in previous sessions. There's not many previous sessions. There have been 2. One I forgot to record, happens. The second one I did record, and then so you'll see in the pink Post-it is a link that takes you directly to when I answered that question. Beauty of technology. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start to jump into some of these questions. So I'm not going to answer any of the ones, of course, that I've answered in the past, unless somebody really wants me to. Otherwise, let's see. So I said, I think Daniel, and make sure you add your name in there so that when when you go back, I can address you by name. So I'm going to take Daniel's because I saw him added in here, and we'll start with that one. So let's see. How to better use the how might we frame, and what are the mistakes people make? So sometimes I'm going to ask you to be more specific about your question. In this case, Daniel, can you just come off mute and just maybe talk me through what you're asking about and maybe give me a little bit more context?
Hi, Jay. I'll try it here.
Right.
So the point is, sometimes I use it myself for my challenges, and still I feel that in some ways it's not narrowed down enough. So after the exercise, the challenge still seems pretty broad. So the question is in this direction, how to make it even more focused on one straight challenge.
Yeah. So if I heard you correctly, the problem that you're trying to understand in terms of problem framing is how can we get more specific so that there's an actual problem that we can work through instead of being really broad. Did I get that right?
Yeah, in that sense, yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, and if I veer off track, just tell me that's not what I was asking, and I'm happy to keep working through it. So, well, first off, take some of the pressure off yourself to get this right on the first time. Problem framing is a really tough thing to facilitate and be a part of. It's abstract. It's talking about problems. I'm running. I just ran a framing workshop with be careful here, with some executives from the automotive industry, and yeah, these are blue collar guys. So when I started using the words around problems and reframing, and even trying to bridge to use language that was more comfortable for them, they didn't understand it. They were like, didn't we hire you to figure out what we're going to build, right? So they were kind of like moving into that solution space. So it's super abstract, and it's related to a question I'm going to put back to you guys later. Bringing more context into it is super important. And so the more that you can share stories about where you want the group to be at the end is helpful. So like by the end of this workshop, if it's problem framing, if it's ideation, if it's strategy, the goal is for us to be here. And you can define that with some other senior leaders or whoever, is sort of like the authority of what brought you together. So defining some success of where you want the group to be is helpful. And then starting to set some constraints around the conversation itself are also helpful. So ruling out what you don't want the group to be focused on, what you don't think is important, super helpful. So what you're doing is you're continuing to kind of like narrow the focus for them. And even then, what you may find is that you go through the practice once so that the group can see how the activity is going to come together in some of the conversations. The conversation itself may lead to additional constraints that the group wants to go back and reset. And so allowing and setting expectations up front that we may go through this once, and then we may go through it a second time, because what we do in the first time is rule out some parts of the conversation, constrain our focus a little bit more, and even understand what's a good problem and a bad problem. So allowing the group to go through it once or twice is fair. Not always, if you do enough expectation up front to tell the group how hard the conversation will be and how abstract it will be, and that you may have to do it a couple times, you buy yourself a little bit of leniency with the group to not feel like they have to get it right on that first time. The more that you know about what the leader wants, the expectations that they have, the constraints that they're aware of, the trends that they have been following in terms of the industry, the market, the company, the team, et cetera, the more that they can bring into that, the more that you as the facilitator can check in to make sure, I see us talking about this, is this appropriate for the conversation, or do we want to bring it up or down a level? Specific frameworks that you could use to make sure that you're talking about the problem at the right level there's one that I know about called abstraction laddering. So when you talk about abstraction laddering, you're thinking about the problem at a current level, and then you go up and down in terms of levels of abstraction. You go down by asking, how do people solve this today? And allows you to just sort of drop down into existing solutions and mindsets and feelings that people have about the problem. And then you can go up and by asking why. So why is this important? And that allows you to have that sort of, you can set the barometer in terms of where do we want to be having this conversation for the rest of the workshop, the day, the program, et cetera. So that's one activity you can give a shot. Is that helpful?
Really helpful. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay. So how can we, I'm going to restate your problem to make sure. How can we make sure specificity? Cool. Cool. Good question. That's a hard one. Does anyone have anything else that they want to add to that, or other things that they've tried to set constraints or get the group to be more specific? Okay.
Jay, it's Mike. I could add one quick thing.
Yeah, go for it, Mike.
I can say sort of like some anti-advice. So like in the conversations leading up to any kind of like session that you're going to run or be a part of. So like I had a situation where people were like, well, is the scope of this conversation about A or B? And I kind of thought, hey, you know what? Let's kind of see what happens if we do a little bit of both. Huge mistake. We tried to have the conversation scope around kind of like two different levels of abstraction. One kind of a little more concrete and another one a little bit more abstract and higher altitude. And the conversation shifting back and forth was super challenging. It was interesting and kind of fun at times, but in the end, super unproductive and a little bit too hard.
So what would you do next time instead of making that invitation?
Leading up, yeah, in those conversations leading up to the session, just being super specific about what's the scope of the conversation and the altitude of the question or what we're trying to solve, and having that be focused on one thing. And if other topics come up, definitely parking lot those and make it clear that like you're going to have a separate session, separate conversation around that.
Yeah. So a lot of planning and prep and expectation setting and constraining.
Yep.
Cool. Thanks for sharing, Mike. I see a question in here that popped in. Daniel, was this yours or somebody else kind of dropped in something about abstraction lettering? This one here that I'm shaking around.
Not mine, sorry.
All right. Okay. I don't understand it. So whoever's one that was, if they want to say more about it, since we're on the subject, we can get that one next. How to maintain which way is up in abstraction lettering.
Yeah, that was me again. Sorry.
Okay. Okay.
Just sometimes when, I guess maybe that's more of a facilitation question than a tool question, but like that question of why and how, like the why questions take you higher in altitude, make it more abstract. And then the how questions can make it more concrete and get you closer to the ground, less abstract. Have you ever had abstraction laddering sessions where people were really confused about which way was up? And, like, hey, right now we're talking about questions that should take us higher in altitude. Let's think about that for a while. And then people start asking a lot of how questions and get the two confused. Do you have any tips for how to facilitate that a little better?
Well, what do you think ultimately the problem that they're facing as people having the conversation? And then what's the problem that you're facing as the facilitator?
Right. I don't know. I think I just think abstraction laddering sometimes, like, it's so valuable and it's such a great tool, but it can be a real challenge to facilitate and just keep it really clear as far as which way is up, and maintaining the focus on, right now, are we as a group, are we focusing on things that are going to bring us higher in altitude, or are we focusing on things that'll take us closer to the ground?
Yeah. Well, I don't know, maybe the altitude is too abstract to be thinking of, instead of how is all about the practicality of the problem. Because what you might find when you ask how, what you might find is that people are solving it in plenty of ways that maybe this isn't such an important problem to be solved, right? So that's kind of like bringing you down and rooting you to understand, should we be working on this problem? Let's learn how people solve it today to give us a little bit more context. And then if you start to question, what do we really want to work on here? Reminding yourself on why this is important, the impact it might have to the people that you're working to solve the problem for, and then even talking through the impact to the company brings you back into that space of, okay, why is this important? How do people solve it today? That's the sort of, if you think about it from a research perspective, before you move into something like a sprint or anything, the questions that you tend to be asking is, what's the problem we're here to work on? Why is it important to those people? How are they solving it today? So that's just that sort of like check-in. Just consider it like a reflection exercise. to make sure that you're working on something that the team still feels aligned on.
Oh, okay, nice. So like if you're asking some how questions, make sure that you're tying it directly to the goals that you have in your company or your project or whatever it is.
Maybe, it gets a little bit dicey if you stray away from the customer, because then you get into some of the politics of what's important to the company. But just to recap, I think it's more like addressing the question of practically, what are people doing today to solve this problem? Like, let's just get into the nuts and bolts of it. It also takes the pressure off people that maybe there's some engineers in the room or some researchers that know more about how people are solving it, and there's people that are less inclined to know about the experience. Just allowing the group to have a conversation about how it's being solved is helpful to sort of root them in. What do we want to focus on? What's not important to focus on? And then the why is the good, because then everybody recenters on why they're there together. Why are you even here? Why is this important to work on?
Oh, got it. Nice. Yeah, I love that.
There's and if you Google abstraction laddering, some of the most helpful videos were recorded like 3 decades ago. There's not a lot of material out there. Our buddy Daniel is sort of like the resident expert on abstraction laddering. So reading some of his stuff and watching some of his podcasts that he's done on abstraction laddering. If you guys aren't familiar, you could Google Daniel.
Okay, cool.
Thanks, Mike. That was helpful. Okay, let's see. Fritz added one in here. How do you differentiate between problem framing in a corporate versus more explorative problem framing for a new venture?
So what I mean with it is usually in a corporate, people know their problems quite well. They have quite some experience with, like, they have tons of problems, and it's more about like, where do we dig deeper, and they can answer the questions. And if you're working with a startup, I'm now working, for example, with a HR company that tries to kind of disrupt the difference between offering HR, like HR hiring via a platform versus headhunting. And they try to bring that together somehow. And they have so many ideas and so many problems they can solve. And for sure, it goes a bit into the direction of research afterwards. But if I ask them, they have a lot of answers, but all of it is not really fact-based. There's a lot of assumptions in there. And if you frame this, you're really tapping in mud or something. It's really not really, it's not that tangible, For me, it's a big difference between the two, and for sure it's a scale, but those two ends of the scale are very different.
Yeah, well, let's see. You already started to answer your own question, I think. So corporates definitely have a lot more expertise. They tend to have more variation of problems that they want to solve. And so who they invite into the sessions is sometimes tense in itself, getting people to participate or narrowing the focus to have the right people in order to stay focused on the right part of the problem. Whereas startups tend to not have really much expertise. There's a founder or two, they were working in some related industry and they saw some problems, and now they want to build that in terms of a new venture that they're working through. But they do a lot of assumption and bias based on their own things. And so I think the biggest problem that I've experienced is along the spectrum of expertise. So in corporates, there tends to be a lot of expertise, but the more expertise they have, it's very internal, and they have a harder time bringing outside perspectives, or there's like, they have legacy products and services that they want to sort of just like build on top of, and they're not willing, or they don't have the invitation to rethink those from the ground up, because that's hard to like detached from what they've been working on for the last 10, 20, 30 years. Whereas startups are like more energetic to solve new problems and disruptive ideas, like you said, but their ability to have outside perspective is pretty narrow. So like the struggles that I'm facing right now with a company that I'm working within is it's a large company that's been around for a long time, but it's a new venture. So we're struggling to bring outside voices and perspectives into that. And it's like outside of their network of people. So I'm doing a lot of cartwheels in the background to make sure that we bring those voices in, because otherwise it's been auto execs that have been in the automotive industry for 30 plus years. So one challenge I face is around expertise. The other thing I'll say that's related to how you phrase the question is sometimes I find problem framing to be an activity I use to set vision. In other words, let's go through and identify different challenges that we think might be happening in the market, and then back up to use it to set the vision and OKRs or whatever you use to set the vision for the next 6 months, quarter, whatever. And then other times it's more explorative within a defined problem space. So they already know that they want to accomplish these things. There's some themes, there's some vision for the company. And now they want to sort of like rumble within that space. I think that was what when I first got into using framing, I thought that was always going to be the use case. I thought there would always be a vision. The team would know which direction they're headed within. There'd be alignment in terms of like the market or the persona. And so problem framing for me used to just be like a 1-hour activity that I just have people kind of like flesh out their problem statements. But then I realized that there was misalignment in terms of the customer. They didn't even really know why they were in the room. So they weren't even sure on which part of the problem they wanted to tackle. Someone would raise their hand and be like, why are you even here? Like, what's the vision for the company for the year? So I'd be like, oh, wow, okay. So it's not always spelled out so perfectly. So I've seen that sort of split use case of problem framing, to use it to manufacture a vision and then maybe do it again, and then otherwise to sort of like find new opportunities within an existing space based on a vision. I kind of strayed from your corporate versus new company, but it is something that I see come up.
Are you like significantly changing the process? So I'm usually like, I always have to adapt a bit, or sometimes quite hard. I don't even know if I'm really problem framing anymore because it can diverge quite a bit. Mm-hmm. But do you have like, would it be best practices in this case? I run more on the process. In this case, I change more, and I might even already reframe way more, etc. Or
yeah, I'm definitely changing
it into pieces maybe and put research in between, or I don't know, like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes. Oh, so okay, there's two parts to this follow-up question. One is the process is constantly changing. Joe is on the call with me. He's helping me think through like new versions of problem framing, because a lot of the time I get questions like, or statements like, I've only got 2 hours. What can I do in that time? Or I'm going to have an executive for 30 minutes. So where should I invite them in? So I am thinking about different ways to do it. But then even within the process, let's just say there was like a textbook process of problem framing. Even within that, depending on where the conversation goes, I may be like, we have to stop. We have to like, I probably should have stopped the one I did last week, but we were toward the end where I realized they were totally guessing about their customer. So I was like, in the back, when I was back channeling with my researcher and this architect that we invited, I was like, let's get through this, but next week we're going to hustle to do a whole bunch of research and validate a lot of this stuff, because I think they're just guessing, and it's a little bit new of a space. So, like research and feeling sure that of the gaps in the conversation are always sort of like the black box for me. So like I have my process, but the process depends on us feeling aligned that we're talking about things that make most sense, that aren't going to impact downstream conversations. So I'm constantly changing it and adapting it depending. It's like I was in an event last week about design sprints that Google organized, like the future of design sprints. And Jake Knapp came on, and someone asked him a question about what do you see all these people that are adapting sprints to fit within their like way of working and team and environment and all those things. He's like, have you run into cases where you get disappointed that someone's calling it a design sprint? And he said, his response was something like, if you remove certain like pillars of the process, then sure, don't call it a design sprint. And I think like if you apply that thinking to problem framing, for me, I think what hasn't moved is walking out of it with a clearly articulated problem statement. That's the goal for me, is to just like help the team align on what it is we're going to work on, and so that the next parts of the process are clear and aligned, and there's less like backtracking and rethinking and starting over and over again. So as long as you can end, however you navigate to get the group to align on what that problem is and who it affects, I think that for me is problem definition and problem reframing. Actually, let me call that out. I think problem definition is all about defining the problem statement. What you may need to change a lot is how you reframe the thinking and the market and the mindset and the opportunities. And that's where the activities and conversations can go all over the place.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, if you're changing it, you're doing it right. It's kind of messy. Thanks, Fritz. Let's see. What else do we have in here? These are existing questions. Yep, these are existing. Okay, I don't see any new ones. In fact, some of these are old, but I just never put answers to them. I'll let you guys come off mute if there's anything that you wanna, anything in here that you're really interested to hear me address. For 5 minutes, let me just give you a quick tour of the toolkit I've created to help with problem framing. Let me share my screen for 1 sec. What I'm just going to show you for 5 minutes or so is the back end of the toolkit, or like what happens once you go inside of it. Most of the questions I get are like, what does it look like? How am I going to work with it? So the toolkit itself is hosted in software called Podia, which is one of the several learning management systems that exist. There's Thinkific, there's Teachable, something like that. I chose Podia. So inside of the toolkit, the reason I created the toolkit was because many times I was showing up and doing like a 1-day or 2-day training workshop on problem framing. But as we're talking about, it's really abstract, it's hard to do. And so the group, the cohort would get together and run through the activities and feel pretty good about it. And then they would go back to their working environments and their teams and their leaders, and they would be sort of like they'd hit a brick wall. So I had experimented with creating longer form training programs. With Daniel Stillman, I created a 12-week program that included framing and leadership and design thinking leadership. But still, even with the longer programs, it felt like the part that was hard for people is to take the stuff and apply it to the context of what they were doing. So I decided, as I was experimenting with creating just a training course, an online course, I found some toolkits that I had used for like brand development and other things. And so I wound up creating a toolkit with the goal, my personal goal was not have to show up for people to learn things that I use and apply. And so give them the training that they need to feel confident that they could get through the process and the methods and the activities. And then also give them all the resources that I use. So if you were to hire me to run a problem framing session, when I get hired to do this, most of the time I'm going into my own toolkit and taking the templates and downloading like a specific project version of them and using all of those materials. And when I make changes, Fritz, to your point, when I make changes, which I make a change every time I get hired to do any kind of session like this, I take those changes and I put them back up into the templates and back up into the toolkit. So it's one question I get is, how do you pay for this thing? Because the question behind it is, when you make updates, will I see the updates in the toolkit? And the answer is yes, but you pay once for the toolkit. It's a one-time, I charge $395 for the toolkit, but as I continue to make changes to it, all those changes flow back up into it. And so like what you'll find inside are, if you break it down, training comes in the form of videos that I record. I'm slowly going through the videos that I first recorded. I created this toolkit back in October of 2019. So I'm now slowly going through the videos and refreshing them, making them better, making them shorter, and just better overall. But the training comes in the form of me recording videos to step you through the process, to step you through the toolkit and the activities. And then there's a whole bunch of resources. So the videos, when you get the toolkit, you can stream through Podia. You don't need to do anything except watch them through a browser. And then all the other resources include templates. So templates in Miro and Mural, they look like this. So if you use Miro, you'll get access to the backup boards, and then you can upload them into your own Miro account so that they're yours. And then you can do with them what you like. There's 4 sets of templates in here. One is around discovery work. So talking to leaders, doing one-on-ones, setting expectations, gathering market research. The other is for the team to feel prepared. So there's some pre-work, there's some agenda setting, and there's just getting used to the tools. And then there's the workshop itself, which looks like this. This is sort of my version of problem framing, which includes 8 or 9 steps. All the way to the end is abstraction laddering, which we were talking about earlier. And then finally is a next step, which allows the group to reflect, to do a reflection activity, and to decide what happens next. We have to do this research. We have to do these interviews. This is who's going to do this. This is who the experts that we're going to talk with. This is what we want to prepare so that we're ready for the next step. And the next step might be a design sprint. It might be another workshop on it. They're meant to, this toolkit and the process itself is meant to work independently of anything else. So again, with Fritz's question, if you want to use it to set vision, if you want to use it to prepare for an upcoming design sprint, all great. And it can be plugged in depending on how you want to use it. So that's the templates. And what else? And then there's a whole bunch of guides. So like, for example, there's a facilitator's guide. This is the Keynote version. There's also a PowerPoint version. So you can, oh no, I'm sorry. In the toolkit, you just get a PDF. But there's all sorts of like a walkthrough of what you can expect inside the guide, inside the toolkit, and it steps you through each and every activity. So this is what you can expect. This is why you're doing it. This is what happens. This is what things will look like as we go through each of the steps. You can see there's timing. And then at the end, there's pro tips for each activity. And then this is where we should be at the end, the outcome, and where to go next. So it takes the templates, there's instructions in some of the templates, but it takes those and really opens them up so that you are fully aware of what should be happening, the hard parts of the conversation, when you get stuck, how you can prompt the team to move forward, some good questions to ask, etc. So there's a bunch of resources like the facilitation guide and videos. Basically, as I continue to learn, I keep putting stuff back into the toolkit. So that's what the toolkit is all about. Did anyone want to ask any questions about the toolkit itself? Okay. What questions are left? What questions would you like me to answer next?
Hey Jay, a quick question here. How do you help folks not spiral into the weeds or get into the weeds? How do you keep the conversation on track?
Help me pronounce your name so I don't mispronounce it.
It's Hala.
Hala. Okay. I'm going to add that. So let me just capture it. How do you keep folks spell that? Let's see the details. Good question. Okay, a couple ideas. So one is to set expectations up front. So I'm an outside facilitator, so I typically don't have all of the context. I don't know the details of the politics and the power dynamics that are happening in the company, which is good and bad. I don't really I'm not worried about them, whereas an internal facilitator is worried. They're managing, maybe their manager and their manager's manager is in the session, and so they're tiptoeing. I'm not worried about that, but I'm also missing some of the perspective. So to help me understand, I do a lot of one-on-ones with any executive leaders that are coming into the session to make sure I understand who's joining, what's the goal of the session, what are you trying to get out of it, what do you know about the space itself, what are the trends, the policies of competition, what should we not be talking about, and ultimately what would be success of this session together. That information helps me to sort of like mirror back to them when they do spiral and when they do sort of like set the level of the conversation that they want to be having. I just basically act as a mirror and I say, what you said was important as far as getting to the end of this conversation was that we have these goals at the end, we have these expectations that we've set. It sounds like you've drifted from that. Do you want to continue talking about that, or should we table this for a later time? And that seems to elicit responses like, you're right, but this is really important and we need to keep talking about it. So even if we go over, or even if we have to like pause on this thing, we have to have this conversation. So me just kind of like facilitating that decision. Other times they say, you're right, we've gone off track, this is not important, but we have to have this conversation later. And then other times they're just like, you're right, not important, just put it off to the side and we'll get back onto it. So me doing the sort of expectation setting and the interviews with leadership beforehand give me that barometer so that I know when we've sort of drifted off. Also, the conversation itself tends to help me understand what's important. So like I start framing with my sailboat activity and setting like the harbor for the group. So that is the vision for the group of where they want to go for this conversation and afterward. So once we start to drift away, to use the sort of analogy of the boat, once we've sort of like drifted off course, it becomes pretty clear that I can point back to that and say, you guys said that you want to be working in this space and solving these problems. It sounds like we're off track here. Do I have that right? Do you want to keep talking about this thing? Those are some of the ways that I tend to. The abstraction laddering tool as well, once you're in the problem itself, that could be a good pause in the conversation to say, why don't we do a quick check-in to make sure we're still talking about the problem at the right level, that we're still aligned in terms of where in this problem space we want to continue talking. So a little bit of interruption as well. I think the hardest part as the facilitator is feeling okay to interrupt. That tends to be the one that we feel most nervous about. But again, as an outside facilitator, I get away with more than maybe folks inside can. Is that helpful?
Totally, thanks.
Good one. Okay. So it's 12:44. This is an hour-long event, but we don't necessarily need to stay for the whole hour. Are there any other questions? I have one question for you guys, if you're willing to help out. Does anyone else have anything that they wanted to cover?
Would we be able to check out the templates and the tool yet?
Yes, what I have, I'm gonna put a link to this. Give me one sec. So I used to have starter versions of the templates, but for a couple different reasons, I stopped working on those. But instead, what I have, I'll put a link to this in the chat, Hala. I have another toolkit, which is free, which is I call problem prioritization. So the first sort of big component of my problem framing process is to help the group move from many different opportunities that they want to try to solve down to one. And then that one problem becomes the focus of the conversation for the rest of the workshop. So I took it's not a complete set of all the resources in the problem framing toolkit, but it's the first 3 activities, some videos to help you through it, some related resources. So that's a good introduction to the toolkits that I create. So if you like that one, you can give it a shot. And then if you want to keep going with the process and you like the way that the toolkit is laid out, then you could pay for the full problem framing toolkit. What else? What other questions do you guys have? Okay. If you have to go, by all means, I appreciate your time. I just have a question for you guys. So one thing sort of related to the question, a theme of questions that always comes up in these sessions and in my coaching sessions is, how do we help people understand what problem framing is, the value of it? Concerns that people have is like, I already have, it was hard enough for me to sell a design sprint, to sell this thing over here, which is all about like ideation and solutioning. How can I convince other people to spend time doing problem framing? So like where in the process it happens, how to use it, the value of it. These are all of the questions that people have around problem framing. And what Joe and I are sort of hypothesizing is that if we were able to provide more context of what problem framing was about, it would help more people understand the value of it. Ultimately, our internal goal is to get more people to feel, to understand the value and to then be compelled to buy our problem framing toolkit. But we're not quite sure what folks like you would need to move you from where you're at today with problem framing to the point where you are excited about it, want to get access to training and templates and all of those other things. Does anyone have any ideas or can talk a little bit about the challenges that you face with understanding framing and selling it to others?
For me, alignment always was the key. As an outside consultant, was the key thing. So large workshops always was giving voice to everyone equally to contribute in defining the playground that we're going to play in.
So Hala, what would be, when you were looking at, I've never done group research like this, so I'm totally like fish out of water right now. What would be helpful for you if you were looking at, if you had minimal time and budget and you were looking at ways to bring framing into your group, what would you need to know about our toolkit in order to say, this seems valuable? Would it be stories? I'm doing my best not to bias. Would it be more examples? Would it be more ideas around the process itself and how it works? What would be helpful for you to move you from where you're at today to spending any kind of money on problem framing resources, like a toolkit? And if anyone else has ideas, I'd love to hear.
Yeah, sorry. No, Hala.
Asking particularly to use your product in the framing process.
Yeah, I missed the first part. Was that a question? You're saying?
Yeah. So are you asking how I can get, for example, my clients to agree to buy your framing toolkit? Is that the purpose?
Yeah, or you, or yes, really anyone. Yes, that's the question.
Jay, Eleanor here from the UK. For me, and I'm in a corporate environment, I don't know if you guys feel the same way, but corporates are less willing to do things if they think that they're the first people that are going to be doing it. So I think stories, examples, just to like almost like a persuasive selling model, right? Just to get the idea across, well, this company did this, they had this problem, and this was the outcome. They saved this amount of time, they saved this amount of money. And then that like reels people in. They're like, oh, well, how did they do that? Or what did they do that's so special? So then from that, then going into the procedures and the methods that are used definitely helps me when I'm trying to pitch the idea. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But if I feel that if like my higher ups think that they're going to be a guinea pig for something that they're not familiar with, even though it is in the industry, then they want to know who else has done it and what their success rate is.
Yeah. Sounds so obvious when you say it. Thank you. This is
No
great.
problem.
Let's done it.
I might add to that. I worked in corporate for quite some while, and if you tell them, hey, success stories, etc., there's also usually not a lot of trust, I would say, at least not in the like highly competitive environments. But maybe what people also can empathize with a bit more might be the opposite. So kind of fuck up stories, and says like, hey, this is basically what happens with you every day. So you solve problems, and in the end, the outcome is not as expected. And then connect it to, yeah, you target it wrong, you know, like an over long distance, for sure, you're not ending up where you wanted to go. And this is something where companies might say, okay, this is something I feel every day in my company, and maybe this is the reason. So let them maybe like experience something they experience every day and link this to the problem framing.
Yeah.
And then maybe add a small test and say like, hey, 5 guys fill the same problem framing sheet, let them fill it out, and then hand it back to them in a tab, and then see, hey, they 5 different personas, 5 different problems in there, 5 different whys, and say like, hey, if you're not aligned, for sure you're not heading in the same direction. So maybe add this like alignment part. This is what we do in problem framing, and on the other side, link their everyday experience to a feeling they have what they didn't solve yet, and then come with what Ella just said, with a success story, and say like, those people changed it, and this is what they got out of it.
Yeah.
Just as an idea from my side.
Thank you. That's great. Yeah. Talking about the problems.
Sorry, for me, it's a matter of define the right problem. We have a lot of problems in the corporate environment. There is a lot of problems for different priorities for each area. So show the biggest, the most important problem is a value. And second, set priorities in this problem, and be sure we are seeing the same animal, no part of the animal, the same animal, and you have to start to eat this big animal bit by bit.
I love it. Yeah, maybe break it down a little bit. Thank you.
What about like a little more context around how it fits into your existing business processes and other frameworks that you're using? Like sometimes it feels like these different processes kind of exist in vacuums and they don't really talk about how they work with others. So like maybe there's like some kind of process of finding out what are the different systems and business processes and tools that you're using. Oh, okay, based on that, here are some of the places and ways that the problem framing helps during each of those. those stages, kind of like in their lingo.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. Like, I think I've only like scratched the surface there to talk a little bit about the connection between framing and sprints. But I think the bigger question that I've definitely heard is, when do we do this? How does it fit in? Who needs to be involved? So almost like summarizing a playbook of when and why. I think about our buddy Richard Banfield, who wrote a Medium article about like when to run a design sprint, and it was like a smash hit because of the infographic that he added in there. It's just like a decision tree, important problem, whatever it was, and he just like helped you navigate to decide if you should run a design sprint on this thing. So that your ideas kind of led me to that.
Mm-hmm.
How and when it fits in, is it important? Cool. Thank you, Mike.
I think like one of the, I think all the ideas here are extremely helpful. The question brings me back to one event, and I think what happened then was almost edutainment. So almost making it fun to learn something new while acknowledging that it requires, vulnerability in the sense that, we've not done this before. It's hard. There's a lot of questions, perhaps a leap of faith. But here, let me show you some stories, and maybe you inject a little bit of humor about other clients and what happened there, and kind of making it more human, especially in engineering environments when, folks in the room are smarter than definitely smarter than you, kind of like smarter than me at least, in the way that they can decompose a problem.
Yeah.
But, I think taking the seriousness and the levity and bringing in that kind of human aspect to it, acknowledging the anxiety and the doubt, and showing the cost of not doing it, to not be that significant. I mean, the exercise is not going to be extremely expensive in the sense of going through the steps. If there's a lot of resistance, I think that's one way that worked with me.
I wrote down cost of not doing it, which is a question I ask my clients all the time. What would happen if we did nothing? Good one. Thank you. These have been great, and I know we're almost at time. Just so you know, so I recorded this. I'm gonna take the answers to the questions. I'll put them back into the Miro board. I'm trying to do these events about once every 2 to 4 weeks. So if other things come up and you want to join a future session, please do, and please share the events with others. I'm making them free so that I can continue to learn and make the toolkits better. So I appreciate you all being here with me. Daniel, I see your comment in here. I'm gonna take it, and I may follow back up with you afterward. I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you all for being with me. Appreciate your time. Have a good rest of the week.